we're gonna today look at the book of Numbers, because we've been going through the whole Bible. We started from Genesis and we're gonna go all the way to Revelation, and by then I'll probably have hair down to my elbows. I started out with a kind of cheekbone length bob, and look where I'm at now because there's no hair cutters open. Kind of funny, isn't it? We'll see how long the hair gets. Hey Laura, it's good to see you too. Thank you so much for the compliment. She said I'm looking lovely, so thank you so much, Laura. And yes, good morning, Emily. Wonderful. Yeah, this is good. Anyway, we're talking about the book of Numbers. Now, anything that's called Numbers sounds pretty terrible, doesn't it? And it sounds like if I was going to the library, that would be the book that I would not get out, the book of Numbers, because I think quite naturally, many people, not all people, look at numbers and think, ugh, boring, spreadsheets or, accounting or something like that. Sorry if you're an accountant and you love all numbers and stuff. And although I'm quite good at math, I can't say it's my favorite thing, It's not something, I love numbers, love doing the family budget. I do not love numbers, but I love the book of Numbers because the book of Numbers is actually, thus far, from me reading from Genesis to now, is my favorite. I'm probably going to say that every week, but it has been interesting. There's so many accounts in there that are really interesting. Just like really wow stuff, really God coming down, doing some supernatural things, more so than in the book of Leviticus, much more. And I loved the book of Leviticus. So anyway, the book of Numbers is I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And I think if you have read it, you are pleasantly surprised. You know what we're in for here. Anyway, let's go through it. Let's start. Okay, Numbers. The Hebrew name for this book is not Numbers, but it is called In the Wilderness, or the Book of Wanderings. So it does actually have a more interesting name in Hebrew, the Book of Wanderings. Maybe they should have kind of advertised it as that. Might have been a bestseller, who knows? But it is kind of a bestseller because the Bible is a bestseller and it remains a bestseller throughout the whole earth. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so why the title Numbers? That's a good question. Because it begins with a census, okay? And just so you know, it begins where the last book left off, okay? So at the last book, we are at the base of Mount Sinai. The children of Israel are all parked up there in their tents, and they have just built the tabernacle, which, just so you know, the tabernacle of Moses was a tent, and everything was packable. God made it so that everything could be packed up neatly, wonderfully, and carried on the journey. So we'll talk about that more in a minute. Anyway, so it begins with a census. They wanted to know how many people they were heading out on this journey. It also, the book of Numbers, ends with a census. So we're counting who starts on the journey to the promised land and who would then be entering into the promised land at the end. Okay. It was written by Moses, another hit by Moses. There you go. It covers a little less than 40 years from Mount Sinai to the Jordan River. Okay. This is from Mount Sinai to just before they're going to go and enter into the promised land, just before they've crossed the Jordan to get into the promised land. So that's where this book takes us. So let me give you an overview of what's happening in this book. Okay, so the book of Numbers is part 4 of a 5-part series, so to speak. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Testament. If you haven't read the other 3 books, Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus, Numbers is going to be a little bit confusing for you. Not to worry, though, if you're just catching on with us right now, because, you could go back and watch the other Bible studies, but I'm going to explain it pretty well, so you'll know what's going on. So please stay on this journey with us. Okay, so in Numbers, the main thing that's happening is the journey through the wilderness to the promised land is now ready to begin. So they've been camped at the base of Sinai. They're establishing law and the tabernacle, and now it's time to head out to the promised land. They've got all they need. God's given them everything they need for this journey. So this is beginning after they exited out of Egypt. This begins early in the 2nd year of them camping at the base of Sinai, okay? Early on in the 2nd year, okay? And the main focus of this book is Israel's repeated rebellion and God's repeated mercy. And although he does discipline the people, so he's showing tremendous mercy for a very rebellious people. They do get disciplined, but we do see that God is so merciful. What he could do and that he does not do, he's so good. And we see the goodness of God in this. And the main verse from this book of Numbers is Numbers 14:11, if you're taking notes. And let me read that to you. This is probably a good sum up of what the whole book is about in one verse. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people spurn me? And how long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst?" You know, it's sort of like God rolling his eyes, like, what have I got to do? I mean, I parted the Red Sea. These people saw the walls of the Red Sea split, and yet they don't believe me. They won't believe what I say. Imagine seeing something. I mean, I'd like to believe that if I saw the ocean split in half and two walls of water appear, I would like to think that I would then believe God if I hadn't up to that point. I would like to believe that, okay? So they'd seen so many supernatural things, and God was literally living as a cloud by day and a fire by night in their camp. And yet they still doubted, and they were still complaining, and they were still a rebellious people. My goodness, what is it going to take? Okay, so we see in the book of Numbers, the people complain on many, many occasions. Oh my goodness, they complain about food. They complain about water. They complain that their enemies are going to destroy them. How could you bring us here, Moses? Look, our enemies are going to kill us. And they continually say this. They say, Moses, you're not a good leader. Oh, Aaron, you're not a good high priest. We can do better than you. We can do a better job than you. Oh, life's so hard in the wilderness. I want to go back to Egypt. And they even complained that I want cucumbers. They missed the cucumbers of Egypt and the garlic and the food they were getting. Imagine missing cucumbers. I mean, I really can't understand missing cucumbers. Cucumbers, of all vegetables, are the lowest form, in my opinion. I'm sorry if you love cucumbers, but I hate cucumbers. They're just like, water. They missed the cucumbers. Okay, let's just get our heads on about this. They missed the cucumbers, but they totally forgot that they were slaves to a horrible, horrible Pharaoh who had the right at any time to do anything he wanted evil to these people, including early on in Moses' life, the Pharaoh then killed all the babies. Remember? That was his mandate. So he was killing all the Hebrew babies. They missed that. I don't think they were remembering that. I don't think they were remembering their time in slavery very well. That they should think of the cucumbers and not the fact that their babies could be killed at any minute. And they could be killed at any minute. And life was oppressive and hard for them. Anyway, so Moses has tremendous pressure from all the people telling him that he's not a good leader. That even his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron complain and gossip about him, about Moses to the people, forgetting that God chose Moses. And they're not putting two and two together here. That a lot of their hardship and the punishments they're receiving are brought on by themselves. They are bringing this on themselves, and they are blaming Moses and they are blaming God. When Moses and God are being very clear with them and saying, listen, you want this to go well with you, then please do what we say. This is how it's going to work. If you get anything given to you, like a machine of some sort, let's say a printer or some kind of computer thing, you're going to look at the instructions. And if you don't use the instructions and do it as the instructions say, well, then you can't expect that it's going to work the way it should. And that is the case here. They are being disobedient upon disobedient, these people, about many, many things. It started when Moses was receiving the 10 Commandments up on Mount Sinai. And one of those commandments are, have no other gods before me. He's walking down the mountain with these 2 stone tablets. And what are they doing? They've built a golden calf. That's in Exodus. So, I mean, before they even got the law, they were breaking the law. So, I mean, these are very disobedient people. Okay, so life's hard because they're hard-hearted and hard-headed. And Moses continually warns them, be obedient. And when they don't obey, trouble comes. Moses always gets the blame. And it's a little bit like when people blame God for all the troubles in the world, right? When it was their own sin. that brought all the troubles into the world. Same thing. The people are at one point ready to stone Moses and Aaron. When I say stone them, I mean they take big rocks and they throw it directly at the parts of your body that will kill you, like your head and your chest, and they crush you to death with stones. So they're saying at one point they're going to stone them because they are so unhappy with their leadership. And in Numbers, we see rebellious Israelites being punished with fire and plagues and snakes. And sometimes God answers Moses' cries for help by punishing the people because the people are deserving of it. And sometimes God just punishes them even if Moses doesn't ask, because God says, you know what, you can't be doing this. I'm a holy God and you have really crossed a line here. But the point here is that we also see God continually showing mercy and kindness throughout the book of Numbers when it is not deserved and when you really think, oh my goodness, what's going to happen now? And then we see the grace of God in situations. And I'll point one of those situations out as we get to it. Now here's how the book's set up. Let me just tell you, you're going to hear me say a lot of times throughout talking about the Old Testament, and maybe even today, about types and shadows. Now, in the Old Testament, types and shadows are like symbolic things that mean things from the New Testament. For example, Pharaoh was a type and a shadow, or a type of devil, wasn't he? Moses is a type of Christ, who's bringing the people out of Egypt. Egypt is a type of representing sin, that God is bringing his people out of sin. The Red Sea parting and them going through the sea is a type of baptism. So you see, it's a type and a foreshadowing of things to come, of things in the New Testament. So you're going to hear me say types and shadows, and that's what I mean by that, is that they represent things. And I will point out to you what they mean. I won't just leave it open-ended. I will point those things out. Okay, so in Numbers 1, the book begins with Moses taking up a census of the people of Israel. Thus, we get the name Numbers. And it's believed that the overall number of people that were traveling as God's people, now listen to this number, because this just helps you to see it, you know? You read it, but you think, oh, there's about 50 tents filled with a lot of families. No. You know how many people were believed to be on this journey? 2.5 to 3 million people. Yeah, that's a lot of people. Million, you heard me right. 2.5 to 3 million people are what people who study the scriptures believe that Moses escaped out of Egypt with. That's a lot of people. Okay, so God wanted a census taken, so that this is why he wanted the census taken. First of all, to know how many he had to start with. Well, he knew, but he wanted Moses to do this, okay? But he wanted to know how many men of fighting age they had. That is right, I said of fighting age. He is preparing an army. So even before they leave to go on their journey, they're getting ready, he wants to know how many fighting men, how many men ready for battle. Why? Why would he want to know that? Because God sees up ahead and he knows that they're going to have to fight battles along the way to the promised land and even in the promised land. So God was getting them ready for that already. Little spoiler alert if you haven't read it, and I have to say it, I mean maybe you know this already if you've read it. This original group of people who are heading out to the promised land, they don't make it. They don't make it. The original people who set out to go to the promised land do not enter in. And I'm sorry for the spoiler alert. I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but it still ends good, so don't worry. Stay on the journey. They don't enter in because of punishment for not believing God, that God could get them into the promised land, and not wanting to even try. And I'll tell you about that in a little bit. Moses also doesn't enter into the promised land, and neither does Aaron. Again, Moses because of disobedience, and I'll point that out to you, and Aaron passes away just prior to them entering in to the promised land. There's only 2 of the original people who set out on the journey who make it into the promised land: Caleb and Joshua. And anyone else who is under 20 years of age enter into the promised land. But if you were over 20 years of age and one of the original people, because of disobedience, because they did not obey or trust or have faith in God, they don't make it into the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua. All right, so that's how I'm letting you know. Note also, okay, you got to note this, that the promised land, and I talked about types and shadows and foreshadowing, the promised land is not a picture or foreshadowing of heaven, okay? Just so you know that, because some people think that. Because you don't need an army to fight for you in heaven, okay? And these people are getting ready with an army, and they know that when they're believe, God had said to them, you're going to have to fight when you get into the land. We don't have, once we're in heaven, we're in. It's good, okay? So the promised land is not a type and shadow of heaven, okay? The promised land is a type of us believing for the promises of God, journeying toward the promises of God. That's what the promised land is. The promised land literally is like our promises that we're believing God for, okay? And our journey in the promises of God, okay? And it's it's the New Testament talks about that our good fight of faith, doesn't it? That to get the promises of God, that we have to fight the good fight of faith, okay? We don't have to pick up swords and battle axes. We don't have to do that. We have to fight with faith, and we have to fight in belief, in trusting our God that what he said and what he has promised, we will receive. And a lot of times we're fighting doubt, and we're fighting people's bad opinions of God, and we're fighting all those things. But that is what we are, as New Testament believers, we are fighting the good fight of faith, okay? These people are actually preparing an army to physically fight, but we fight with the good fight of faith, okay? Into the promises of God. So they're going to be on the move, and we see that God is a God of order right from the beginning of the book of Numbers. I mean, taking a census, right? He's a God of order and not of chaos. Yes, taking this census, and planning to move. We're going to see this. Now, what I want to show you is this. In the beginning, I loved this. This really spoke to me so much. In the beginning of the book of Numbers, before they even set out, I pointed out there's between 2.5 and 3 million people. That's a lot of people, okay? So God wanted order, not chaos. So he gives Moses the plan. Says, this is how, throughout traveling through, that you're going to have to set up camp, okay? He says, I want these 3 tribes over here, and I want these 3 tribes here, and this here, and that here. And I want the tabernacle always set up directly in the middle. I'm going to show you a picture. It's an above ground diagram of what it would have looked like from an aerial view if you would look down onto the campsite of Israel. And you're going to love this. Look at that. What do you see there? What do you see? That is right. If you are seeing a cross, you are right. That's the temple, the tabernacle in the middle, and the Levites, the priests. These are where all of the different tribes were to be. And you are seeing a cross. That is right. Look at that. God was already thinking about the redemption of mankind, even in that, and they didn't even realize it. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that amazing? This is the setup, and this was going to be from all the way from Sinai to just to the Jordan, just before they got into the promised land. This is what their camp was going to look like. Beautiful. Anyway, there you go. Okay. So we see that the formation of the camp as they move through the wilderness is a cross, foreshadowing of Jesus and God's ultimate plan to save us all. God is right in the middle of their lives, so that bit in the middle was the tabernacle. He wanted to be the center of their lives. He wanted that for them personally and as a group of people, that the center of their lives would be God and the tabernacle. Okay, and we read as they set off, and it says, I'm going to read this from the Message Bible, Numbers 10:33, and it says, and so off they marched from the mountain of God. They marched 3 days with the chest of the covenant of God in the lead to scout out a campsite. The cloud of God was above them by day when they marched. Let me see, does it go on to say? When they marched from the camp with the chest leading the way. Isn't that amazing? So they marched out with the Yes, with that chest of God. Remember where the mercy seat of God was and where his presence rested. And that was leading the way, and the cloud of God was leading the way, and they marched out. Okay, so in Numbers 10, takes place from Sinai to a place called Paran, and it was not a great journey. The people keep complaining against God and Moses. Fire breaks out at one point and begins to burn the edges of the camp as judgment. And then a plague happens for something else they complain about, and then Miriam does her complaining bit along with Aaron, and she gets judged with leprosy. That's right, Miriam gets leprosy, and Moses has to intervene on her behalf, and God does heal her. And so that's where we see another act of the mercy of God, because from what she did, she could have been killed. She could have, but God said, no, she shall live. I'll heal her, and she's learned her lesson. So all along the way, Moses is asking God not to destroy them all, and God is so good, he complies. Numbers 13 through 19, Moses sends the 12 spies out when they're about halfway to the land of Canaan, to the promised land. It's called Canaan. Joshua and Caleb are part of that team, and all the spies, apart from Joshua and Caleb, think they cannot take the land. They say the people in the land are too strong, we're too weak, God could never do this, even God can't do this. Joshua and Caleb are like, no, we can do this. But the people, the 10 spies win out, and God punishes them for this act of disobedience, for their lack of faith. And that is when he says to them, you're going to wander now. You're not going to get in. Only Joshua and Caleb will get in, but only after everyone 20 and over dies in the wilderness. And you're just going to wander until you're all dead, but I am going to be gracious to you and allow your children to go in. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, no, you cannot do that. You can't go in. Your children can't go in. I'm just going to start over new. And there was one point when he had a conversation with Moses where that was what his plan was. And then Moses says, no, God, I intervene for the people. I'm praying for them. I'm interceding, and I don't want that to happen. And God complies again. Okay, so they have to wander. This is something. Did you know that it is believed that the journey through the wilderness would have taken 40 days if everything had gone well? But you know what? It took 40 years because of their complaining and because of a punishment. And that is so sad because of their disobedience and faithlessness. Anyway, okay, because God already told them, I'm giving you the land. You know, you're going to win the battles. Just do what I say. Obey me. But they disobeyed and they were punished. And a point to ponder is this. Why was Joshua's faith so strong? Joshua and Caleb, in particular Joshua. Why? Why was he able to believe God was able to do this for them and take the land? But the other 10 were like, no, we can't do it. We're just like little grasshoppers and they're giants. Why? Well, because if you were to look back in Exodus 33, 1 through 11, it describes the tent of meeting, that tabernacle that Moses built. It was a place where Moses was regularly meeting with God, and Joshua would accompany Moses to this tent of meeting as God spoke to Moses face to face, and Joshua was often present, watching all of this. And after Moses had heard from God, he would then leave the tent and do whatever God told him to do, right? And he would address the Israelite people, all right? This is happening in Exodus 33. But verse 11, Exodus 33, verse 11 says, Joshua did not leave the tent. So Moses would do his thing with God. The cloud would come. He'd hear from God. Joshua was just watching and just in awe of all that was happening, in awe of the presence of God. And even after Moses left, Joshua stayed. He stayed in the presence. He wanted to lap up every little bit of the presence of God. He wanted to be there where God was. Where, remember, the people of Israel were like, Moses, we're just happy to stay here. You be our mouthpiece with God. You be the one, our go-between. Joshua was not happy with that. Joshua wanted to be where God was. And because of that, he had a strong relationship with God, with a love for God, because knowing God makes you trust him, and that just makes sense. Knowing anyone, if you know someone and you know they're of good character, you will trust them. Joshua knew of the character of God because he was there in the presence of God. He did not want to leave it. So because of that, his faith was strong because of the presence of God. Let's learn from that, okay? The presence of God makes us trust him and have faith. Everything we do should come out of relationship with God. That makes it easy. Having faith when you don't really know and love and you don't have a relationship with God, it's hard. But when you know God, when you know his faithfulness, when you know what he said of himself, when you've thought about these things, you then begin to trust him because you love him, and faith comes easier. Okay, Numbers 20 through 21. Moses disobeys God. This is what didn't allow Moses in with the water at the rock. Remember, the people were like, oh, you took us here and there's no water. And God says, speak to the rock, Moses, and water will come out. Well, Moses was so annoyed with the people. He took his stick and he hit it twice on the rock, and he was screaming at the people. And because of this, it was seen as disobedience by God, because he didn't do what God said. God said, just speak to the rock and the water will come. He didn't do that. And God said, and because of this disobedience, you will not enter in. I'll let you see the promised land from a high mountain, but you can't go in. Also, Aaron dies because it is time now. God says, I'm going to take him up the mountain and he will go and be with his people. And his son will now be the high priest. Okay. So Israel defeats lots of enemies along the way as they're still traveling. Again, a portrait of God's grace and mercy. They did not deserve that, to have God help them win battles, but he was helping them to win battles, even though they were disobedient and really awful to God. They end up at the Jordan River just before crossing to the Promised Land. And that is where we end in the book of Numbers. So we're ending just before we're going into the Promised Land. Now, Numbers 22 through 26, they keep messing up, but God is so merciful, he doesn't wipe them out. Many of the surrounding peoples of other cultures watching, looking, to the people of Israel, are very scared of the people of Israel because they see that God is with them. Especially, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, a king of a place called Moab, called Balak. All right, Balak, king of Moab. Not a good dude, okay? Not a good dude. And we're going to talk about him in a minute. Anyway, Joshua replaces Moses. That's who's going to take over from Moses. So we're all teed up at the end of Numbers and ready to go into the next book. But Moses isn't quite dead yet, okay, just so you know. So when we begin the next book, which is Deuteronomy, Moses is then going to give his final sermon before they go into the Promised Land, before he dies. So we still see Moses in the next book. But really, the baton is passed on to Joshua. Here we are at the end of the book. We're just this side of the Jordan River, ready to take the Promised Land, Canaan, and that's where the book ends. So what do we see in Numbers? Okay, we see a holy God dwelling with his people, and that makes me realize something, that I'm so thankful that I don't live under law, and I know that you are too, especially since we talked about law, and law is harsh and it's hard to keep. And we see how unfaithful people can be, even with so many evidences of God's presence. I mean, he was there in cloud and in fire. He had done so many supernatural things for them. There's even a part where some people, Levites, were rebellious against Moses and Aaron. And they were like, we can do a better job. Who do you think you are, Aaron? And God shows the people of Israel that Aaron and Moses are his choice and that they better not speak against them by opening up the earth. And the earth swallows this man called Korah and his whole family and all the rebellious ones and just eats them up. The earth eats them up. I mean, they saw all this. And it didn't seem to really make a difference to the obedience level of the people. That's a little scary. Which is yet another reason that the law is not the ultimate answer to the sin issue. Last week we learned that God wanted to write the laws on their hearts and give them a heart of flesh, a heart of obedience toward them, not doing it because they had to do it, but because they wanted to do it. The wilderness wanderings accounts are used throughout Scripture. Okay, you're going to see the wilderness wandering mentioned throughout many other parts of Scriptures, even in the New Testament, both the Old and the New, to serve as examples to us. We see it in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 11 through 13. Paul speaks of the wilderness wanderings and how we are to learn from them. So this is some stuff that we can learn from Numbers, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is talk about a few things I learned in the journey, as I've read this. Now, we all have done things in life that we now have hindsight, right? And if we could go back and do them again, we would do them differently, wouldn't we? We all have things, this time I wouldn't do that. This time I would not confide in that person. This time I wouldn't have put my money into that thing that didn't work out. This time I wouldn't have bought that house that had all these problems. There's things we wouldn't, having hindsight, we would do things differently. Well, unfortunately, these people did not have any, they didn't have a journey yet, so they had no hindsight. We have the hindsight of their journey. So what I'm going to teach you is, what I'm going to talk about is, pretend I'm the stewardess and you are all the people who are on my airplane that I'm in charge of, and you are going on a journey. We're all going to a place called Canaan. We can all pretend, right? Because we can't really travel. So let's pretend that I'm a stewardess and I'm taking you on a journey. You're all in my airplane. And from the hindsight of the journey of the children of Israel, we have the luxury of knowing what made their journey fail, don't we? Now, this book is called The Journey, the Wanderings, isn't it? The Wanderings, what is it called again? The Book of Wanderings. But it didn't have to be that. It could have been called How the Children of Israel Got to the Promised Land. Wonderful. Tickety-boo. Wonderful. But it wasn't that. But it can be that for us. You see, because we have their journey to learn from, all the pitfalls, all the things we don't have to do, or the things we should do, to make our journey not like their journey, so that our life is not wandering through the wilderness in the promises of God. But okay, I've learned this with hindsight, the luxury of hindsight. We are going to have a good journey. So come on my journey with me, and we are going to learn what is going to make our journey work and be successful, so that we're not 40 years flying our airplane through the wilderness of the sky. Okay. So what the book of Numbers teaches me about me on my walk with God, okay, to make my journey easier. 1, complaining stinks, all right? Quite easy. Complaining stinks. You don't need to know that in Hebrew, okay? It just stinks. Numbers 11:1. I'm going to read this to you. The people fell to grumbling and complaining over their hard life. God heard. I'm reading from the Message. When he heard, his anger flared. Verses 4-6. The riffraff among the people had a craving, and soon they had the people of Israel whining. Why can't we have meat? We ate fish in Egypt and we got it free. To say nothing of the cucumbers, here we go with the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. They were missing all this stuff. But nothing tastes good out here. All we get is manna, manna, manna. Imagine, God gives you supernatural food from heaven, and you say, all you give me is this supernatural food from heaven. I miss the cucumbers. I miss being a slave and having Pharaoh beat me every day. I mean, they might as well have said that, right? Verse 10, Moses heard the whining. So God heard the whining, Moses heard the whining, and God's anger blazed up. You don't see any thankfulness in these people, nothing. So God grants them the meat that they're asking for. And he says this in verses 18-20 of Numbers 11. You're going to eat meat till you're sick of it. It's a real parent thing, isn't it? Like, I would say this to my teenage children or my kids. If they'd be like, I want this and I want that. I went, oh, you want that? I'll give you that. I'll give it till you're sick of it. Till it's coming out your nostrils, till you are sick of it. And here's why. Because you have rejected God, who is right here among you, whining to his face. Oh, why did we have to leave Egypt? Verse 29. But while they were still chewing the quail, the meat that he'd given them, and had hardly swallowed the first bites, God's anger blazed out over the people, and he hit them with a terrible plague. Those who craved meat died. And the place was called the Graves of the Craving. Okay? Chapter 20 talks about more complaining. Complaining for water. Why did you take us here and leave us and not leave us in Egypt? We're tired of traveling. There's no decent food. There's no water. We hate manna. This is all the things they're complaining of. You took us here to die. We don't like our leader. God's forsaken us. They were judged for all of this. For all this annoyingness, with fiery snakes came out of like nowhere and started biting the people because God was so sick of them. He was just tired, and he was like, I'm tired of this now. I'm tired of this. I'm showing you mercy upon mercy. You're bringing this judgment upon yourself. Remember who I am, a holy God. I can't have sin in my presence. But he even shows them mercy then. And there's this very unusual story about this pole that he tells Moses to make and fashion out of bronze with a snake on the top. And if all the people would look at this thing, that they would be healed of the snake bite. So we even see the mercy of God, the grace of God in doing that, because they didn't deserve it. They really all deserved to die with the plague of snakes. But they didn't, okay? Now, just so you know, because we're talking about complaining here, the Greek word that's translated complainer means literally one who is discontented with his lot in life. One who's discontented with his lot in life and lots of complaining, talking about this, talking about that. As a child of God, complaining is a terrible, terrible witness for Christ. Terrible. Okay? When we complain, let's say we're complaining about our church, complaining about our pastor, complaining about life, complaining about my lot in life, complaining, right? Okay, maybe you have some genuine things that you're unhappy with, but you're just complaining. Everybody sees it. God sees it. Your friends see it. Your workmates hear it. Your children hear it. Everybody hears it. And you know what it sends out a message of? It sends out the message of God is not enough. Jesus isn't very fulfilling. You know? That's the message we send out when we complain. And so I've learned through this journey, I've got to watch my mouth. I've got to watch what I say. Complaining is a bad witness for Jesus. All right? Philippians 2:14 and 15. This is the New Testament, because I just want you to see that complaining stinks in the Old Testament, complaining stinks in the New Testament. It's not a testament thing, it's a life thing. Get rid of it. It'll make your journey harder and longer. And nobody will want to be near you, okay? Do all things without grumbling or complaining, okay? Or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in this world. When we are complaining, we are dampening out the light in our life. You are not being the light of this world. You're being a noise. And people are looking at you, and you know, people are polite. They're not going to say anything, but you're gonna find people don't want to hang out with you. The ones who do want to hang out with you, you know, what's wrong with them? Why are they listening to this stuff? You're just feeding them. You're feeding them bad stuff. Don't do that. No complaining. Let's make it a non-complaining journey to the promises of God. When we have a problem, let's pray about it. If we can sort out the problem directly with the person, go to them. You know, if you have a problem with your pastor or with a friend or with a workmate or with your boss, go to them. Don't talk behind their back. Don't do it. Don't complain about everything. Go and talk to them. All right? Sort it out in the right way. All right, so no complaining. Gossip stinks. That's the next thing. So complaining stinks. Gossip stinks. And God hates it. And in the Old Testament, he hated it, and he still hates it in the New Testament, okay? In Numbers chapter 12, we have Miriam and Aaron, and they talked bad about Moses behind his back to the people. First, they started talking bad about his wife. They said, we don't like his Cushite wife. She was a Cushite. I don't know what that means or why. It doesn't even get into why they didn't like her. They're just talking bad about the guy's wife. You don't do that, okay? They were doing that. And they said, is it only through Moses that God speaks? Doesn't he speak through us also? And it says in chapter 12, and God overheard their talk. You know what? God is the silent listener to everything we say, everything. He knows the intention and the motive of our heart, and he hates gossip. He hates it. And that, again, not an Old Testament thing. It's an All Testament thing. Miriam was severely punished for it in the Old Testament, and she got leprosy. God healed her as a grace, but he did say to her for that, I'll heal you of the leprosy, but you can't be in the camp for 7 days. Get out of the camp for 7 days. So she had a punishment, and he even pointed it out that in the law, when a child would do something so offensive to a parent, that it was like the father could almost spit in the child's face as a physical way of showing you have just been horrible, you know? And God said, well, in the law, wouldn't a father put a child out of the camp and spit in their face? He said, send Miriam out of the camp for 7 days. Like a spit in the face from God. Who wants that? I don't want that. I am going to watch my mouth, because gossip is going to make the journey a lot harder for me. So no gossiping, all right? No talking about people. When you've got something to say, be brave. Go to them if you have to. Go to them. You know, don't let God be the silent listener of your conversation as you rip apart your leaders, as you rip apart your friends, as you rip apart your boss. You know, when it gets back to them, and it often does, you know, you have to live in the bad of that. We don't want to have to do that. No gossip. James 1:26, New Testament says, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Let's not let what we believe be worthless to others, okay? All right. So we've learned some stuff about us on the journey. No complaining, no gossip. Let's leave those things out of our journey. What do we learn about God on the journey that's going to make our journey a whole lot easier? Okay, 1, he's a planner, all right? And he plans meticulously. And he has a plan for you, and he has a plan for me. There were plans all around the children of Israel, and yet they failed to see the plan that God had for them. God was, if you read the beginning of Numbers, he had plans for their army. He had plans as they march out, in what formation they should march through the desert, how they should camp out, how they should put their tents, how they should set up the tabernacle. He had plans for their legal system. He had plans for everything, and his plans were meticulous. Let me just show you this again. Look at this. This was the plan how the children of Israel were meant to be camping, how he wanted their tents set out. On the surface was the people wanted organization, right? Well, he wanted organization. But God was using his opportunities of planning, and he was threading his overall plan into their momentary plan. You know, they were like, we want a plan for water. We want a plan for food. He's like, I got that. Don't worry about it. But I've also got the whole entire plan for humanity, and you can't even see it because you can't see the aerial view. You don't know what I'm doing. You don't know all my plans. I've got plans. I've got plans for you. I haven't told you all my plans, but I'm threading them into everything you're doing, everything you're learning on your journey, everything. You think, you know, like, did you ever see The Karate Kid? I know some people might get upset because people don't like karate and they think it's bad, but The Karate Kid learned a lot of his fighting, and Mr. Miyagi would say, I want you to wash a deck, I want you to wash a car, and I want you to do things this way, and he thought, I'm just cleaning your car and I'm cleaning your deck. And later he realizes that all these things he was doing, you know, were moves that he was learning and getting ready for his fight. And he didn't even realize it was all threaded into the plan. You know, as we journey and we're wondering, does God have a plan for me? You know, do you have a plan for me, God? Is there anything else? Are you doing something? You know, in the journey, as we're being obedient, his overall plan for our lives are threaded into the journey. He doesn't tell us everything. Did he tell Job everything that Job was going through? No, Job just had to be obedient. He told Abraham some stuff. That along his journey. So sometimes we're going to know some stuff. Sometimes we're going to be completely in the dark about stuff. The point is, be obedient. Whatever God is telling you to do, do it. If he says pray, be praying. If he says, I want you to fast, fast. If he says, I want you to stop doing something, like stop grumbling, stop complaining, you know, stop. Do what he tells you to do, because it's all threaded in the plan, your particular plan. Okay. All right. So God says, you know, these people are complaining for meat, right? And they want meat. And God says, okay, I'm going to give them meat. So Moses gets a little upset when God says, I'm going to give you meat. Numbers 11, 21 and 22. I'll read this. Moses says, I'm standing here, God, surrounded by 600,000 men. That's just the men, okay, on foot, the soldier people. And you say, I'm going to give them meat for every day of the month. So Moses is having a little word with God here. So where is it going to come from, God? Even if all the flocks and herds are butchered, would there be enough? Even if all the fish in the sea were caught, would that be enough? Where's the meat going to come from, God? You promised them meat. It's going to come back on me, God. But God responds in verse 23, and he says, God answers Moses, so do you think I can't take care of you? You'll see soon enough whether what I say happens to you or not. Basically, he's saying, Moses, I said I'd get them meat. Do you not think I'm going to give them meat? I'll give them meat, okay? What I say, I come through. God is good on his word, okay? There's plans all around us every day in our lives. Look around you. The whole solar system is above our heads, and we don't even realize that the planets and the earth is turning on its axis, and the seasons and you know, everything is happening around us. We don't even realize the things that are going on in this earth that God has planned. It's just like the children of Israel didn't even realize they're in the shape of a cross here, you know? And we wrestle with doubts as to whether God has plans for us, Yes, he has plans for us. Okay? Just so you know, when Joshua got into the promised land, he was between, it is believed, 68 and 78 years old as he's entering into Canaan. You know how old Caleb was? 85. But it says also of Caleb that it was like he was a young man. And they lived many, many more years, and they fought many battles, and Joshua obtained a lot of the land of Canaan for the children of Israel. They never lived in all the land, sadly. They never obtained all of their promise because of constant sin and rebellion, and they didn't do all that God said. But Joshua was instrumental in getting so much of that land. You know, our lives, just because we're older, you might say, but I'm older now. I'm a bit older. You know, God has plans for the young people. No, it doesn't say that. It says God has plans for you. I know the plans I have for you. Not I know the plans I have for you if you're still 18. God has plans for you, okay? Always remember, Joshua, he's almost 80, you know, between 70 and 80. And Caleb, 85. My goodness, life was just beginning. Life was just getting good for them then, okay? And God has a plan for us. All right. Okay, another thing we learn on the journey is God is truly good. This is another thing we learn about God. If you know this at the start of the journey, it's going to make your journey easier. He is truly good. Now, we did a Bible study on the goodness of God. You might want to go back and find that one. And we talked about how good God was. But in this story, we see God is good. And even though these people did not deserve his goodness, he was good to them. There were many times that he showed them mercy and grace by giving them manna, by giving them water from a rock, by not utterly destroying all of them when they were faithless and not trusting God and not trusting in his strength and not believing the words he said. He didn't kill them. Even when they outright said, God can't do this for us, we're like grasshoppers. We'll never get into that promised land. He can't do it. He's not strong enough. Even then, he said, you're not getting in, but I'm going to be gracious to you and your children can get in. That was a goodness of God there, a grace and a mercy that they may not have because of their sins. But you know what? Your children are guiltless. I'm going to let them in. What a good thing God did there. What a grace. Okay, so God is merciful and good. God even said of himself, this is what we talked about when we talked about the goodness of God in Exodus 34:6. God says this of himself. And he passed in front of Moses proclaiming, the Lord, speaking of himself, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. God says this of himself. And it is true if you look in the book of Numbers. He is good to them. And Moses falls back onto the character of God and even at one point reminds God of those words that he spoke in Exodus about being so good. When God's saying, you know what, Moses? I'm ready to destroy the people. Let's just end it. I'll start again new with you. We'll start fresh and clean. And Moses says, but God, you are good. And you've made promises, the promise to Abraham. Remember that promise, Lord? And the surrounding people, they might not believe you're good if they see you destroy the people. And God says, yes, I did say I'm good. And he relents of wanting to destroy the people based on Moses and how Moses, not reminding God, but saying to God, you are good, God. You said you're good. I believe you're good. And he fell back onto the character of God's goodness in saving the people. Okay. And God wants us, this is going to make our journey a little easier too. He wants us to believe in his ability and his word. Anything else is a sin. Anything else apart from believing what God says is a sin. It says in Hebrews 11:6, without faith, it is impossible to please God. You can't please him except by believing him. By when he says something that you say, yes, God. Yes, you said it and I believe it. You said it, I believe you are truthful and I believe you're going to do what you say you're going to do. You know, I want to be like Caleb and like Joshua. I want to be the ones that the word of God says in Numbers 14:24. This is what it says of Caleb and Joshua as opposed to all the other people. It says, Caleb and Joshua, they are of a different spirit. I want God to say that about me. I want God to say, Gina, she is of a different spirit. I want him to say that. And what is that different spirit? That different spirit was when they spoke out the words, when everyone else was saying, we can't do it, we can't get into the promised land, there's no way, we're not getting in, those people are too big, there's giants in the land. Caleb and Joshua said this, Numbers 13:30. We're well able to take the land. Come on, Moses, let's do it. We can do it because God is with us, not because we're strong, because he's strong. They were looking at the power of God's might, not their own strength. They were believing God based on who God is, not who they are. They knew very well who they are. They're just flesh, sinful men. They knew God could do anything, and they were putting their trust in God. Let's be of a different spirit, like Caleb and Joshua. So when God looks at us while we're believing for our promises, he says, I see faith. They're of a different spirit. They're not like the spirit of this world. They believe in me. They trust me. Okay, what else do we learn about God on the journey that's going to make our life easier? Even when I can't see it, he's working. We all know the song, Waymaker, so popular, that song. Waymaker, even when I can't see it, he's working. I'm not going to sing it for you, okay? I'll sound awful. But that line, even when I can't see it, he's working. There's a very strange little story in Numbers 23 through 24, okay? Chapters 23 and 24. And this is what I'm talking about. Balak, the king of Moab. First of all, know what his name means. His name means, Balak means one who lays waste, okay? You don't want to be hanging out with a guy whose name means one who lays waste. To lay waste to something is to destroy it, okay? And he's trying, true to his name, to destroy the Israelites with a curse, okay? He tries 3 times. He gets this guy who's called Balaam. Now, there's 2 guys. Balak is the king of Moab, and Balaam is a non-Israelite pagan prophet, okay? He knows about God. He knows about lots of pagan religions, and he's not a good guy according to the Word of God. Actually, the Word of God speaks of him as a wicked man. In both the Old Testament and the New Testament, he's referenced. So it's good to know this story in Numbers 23 and 24. He's spoken of in 2 Peter chapter 2, in Jude 1, and in Revelation chapter 2 is the story of Balaam and Balak. So Balaam is this pagan prophet. So Balak is this king of Moab. Now, Israel doesn't know any of this is even going on, okay? They don't even know this. This is all happening up in a mountain, on a mountainside. Israel is in a valley. Balak and Balaam are up on a mountain. And Balak, the king of Moab, is scared of the children of Israel because they are too numerous. And he's heard things about how God fights for them. And he's scared of them. And he doesn't want... And Israel had nothing... They were no threat to him. They didn't say, we're going to destroy you, we're going to come through and pillage your land. None of that. They're really unfounded, his fears. But he was afraid. And he went to this guy Balaam, because Balaam had a reputation for cursing people and the curses coming to pass, or blessing people and the blessing coming to pass. And he goes to Balaam and he says, listen, I want you to curse them for me, because I know I'll pay you a lot of money, come and do it. So Balaam says to him, okay, so first he says no, because God actually says, don't you dare go. Don't you do it, Balaam. But Balaam pushes and pushes, and God finally says, okay, go. So he goes, but God says, don't you dare speak a word unless I tell you to speak it. So he goes, and he says to Balak, the king, he says, I can't say anything unless the Israelites' God says I can. And he says, all right, well, whatever, curse them for me. So he does it 3 times. He takes them to 3 different parts of a mountain, says, overlooking the people of Israel. I want you to put a curse on them. Go ahead, do it, and I'll give you a lot of money for it. And every time Balaam tries to curse them, he can't. A blessing comes out of his mouth, and it happens 3 times. And ultimately, what he says is, I can't curse what's already blessed. The people of God were already blessed. This was happening up on a mountain, and God was not allowing a curse to be put on these people. They never even knew this story. They didn't even know it was happening. So we don't even know the things God is doing for us behind the scenes in our lives. What he is stopping coming through to our lives. What he is allowing to come into our lives. You know what? He only allowed blessing to be spoken over his people. Okay, so we do not know what he is doing for good behind the scenes in our lives. Read the story of Balak and Balaam. It is wonderful. It's in Numbers 23 and 24. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about is this, all right? We're near the end here, and I'm going to go through it quick. There's a song out now, and everybody's singing it. It's called The Blessing. Have you heard of The Blessing? Put a little heart there. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of little hearts. Yeah, all the little hearts. We all know The Blessing, you know. It's a beautiful song. And I think Carrie Job sings it, but now everybody sings it. We've got different nations have their own versions of it that they're singing over their nations. We have our own UK version of it. It is beautiful. I know Boris Johnson really liked it and was very blessed by it, and that blessed my heart. There's a million different versions of it now. And that is from the book of Numbers. That is right. I'm sorry, Carrie Job did not write the words to this. She sings the words to this and she puts it to music, and she has done it superbly. But it is from Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 through 27. And it is called the priestly blessing. Because, and let me tell you, this so excites me. Because God says to Moses, he said, Moses, tell Aaron, the high priest, tell Aaron, this is how I want you to bless my people. So this is a blessing that God made up. That God said, speak this over. When you bless Israel, this is how I want you to do it. And this is how we read it in the Bible. Okay, so this is Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 through 27. Tell Aaron and his sons, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, and notice, this is me saying this, notice these are God's words and his idea of what a blessing upon his people is, okay? This is the blessing. This is it. This is what God says. Say this. He wants the high priest to speak this. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And it's lovely and it's beautiful. But it loses some of its potency in translation. Okay? Now, I have read, why is this not here? Did I have this somewhere else? Okay. Oh my goodness, I think I'm actually missing. No, I'm not missing anything here. Okay. Wait a minute. I apologize right here. I actually am going to put a link below, or in the, where is it going to be? In the comments, there's a link. Now, I got this because I don't speak Hebrew, but there's a man who speaks Hebrew, and he's written an article, and this idea comes from this article. Let me see if I have it on this page, the name of the article, because you're going to be blessed by this. Yes, I have it right here. It's called, from an article, The Aaronic Blessing from a Hebrew Perspective. Not ironic, Aaronic, because it was Aaron, the priest, who was meant to be speaking this. Now, I'm putting the link so you can read this article, because I can't get into the ins and outs. It's late now, and we need to get on with our day. But it's by a man called Jeff A. Benner, and he says that it's lost its potency, its oomph, its punch from the original Hebrew, because the Hebrew people would have understood these words bless and keep and gracious and countenance and peace in another way. They mean something different, deeper in the Hebrew language. There's a richness of the blessing that comes through even stronger in its original language than its translation into English. So we can better understand the true meaning of this priestly blessing as it was understood by the ancient Hebrews. So I don't have time to dissect it today, but I am going to read it to you as it would have been understood by the Hebrew people. This song, The Blessing, okay? So I'm going to read it to you as understood. This beautiful song that we sing all the time. Okay, and here it goes. Yahweh will kneel before you, almost like a parent would kneel before a child to present a gift, presenting gifts, and will guard you with a hedge of protection. Yahweh will illuminate the wholeness of his being towards you, bringing order, and he will give you comfort and sustenance. Yahweh will lift up his wholeness of being and look upon you, and he will set in place all you need to be whole and complete. Now, I just want to show you this picture, okay? Because I read this, and not from this article. This was from another article on that scripture. But the bit of that says, and the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. How does the Lord lift his face toward us? Because the Lord is so high above us, isn't he? He is so, he lifts his face to us. We're not up there. This is what it means to the Hebrew people. I want you to look at this picture, that he would lift us. You get me emotional. Just because it's so beautiful, that he lifts us like a little child, and he looks into our face, and he lifts his countenance toward us and gives us his wholeness. Do you see how when we sing that beautiful song over our lives in its original language, and then please go to that article and read it, because it is so rich with how good God is, how we understand the goodness of God, how good he was then, how good he is now, how he lifts his countenance, his peace, his wholeness toward us, just like a dad would lift his child. We are his children. These were his children. And God is so good. And these are things that I'm telling you so we don't have to wander in the wilderness of the promises of God, that we can just believe him, that he's good, and he wants to bless us, and he wants to do good for us, and he wants to get us from A to B without trouble, without a fight, because he fights for us. Jesus is the one who fights for us. He is our high priest. If you watched last week, where I talked about the priests and the high priest. Jesus is our high priest, and he blesses us. He's the one who speaks the blessing over us. And as he lifts us, his children, and looks into our faces, and his countenance shines upon us, how could we not be blessed? How could our journey not be good? If he is for us, who can be against us? And as we end today, I'm sorry I went about a few minutes over, but I thought it was worth it to hear that. Enjoy your week. Have a beautiful day. Be blessed today, and just know that you are blessed as he shines his face upon you and gives you of his wholeness. Have a great week. Bye.